Hello everyone, thank you for tuning back into the channel. Really happy to see you here. Today we have a brand new video about a pretty interesting concept. We're going to be talking about testing, and not only about testing, but we're going to be talking about black box testing and how you might want to approach testing on a, say, React application so that your tests are reliable, so that you know that your tests are actually testing whatever you want your user to do with your application, and that they won't break so easily, so that they add value to you, the developer. So in case you want to go and refactor something, you can do so without having to worry that your tests will break, right? So let's first talk about this concept of black box testing. So as you can see in the image, black box testing is based on the user or whomever is doing the act of testing gives an input into the application, which is a black box, so you don't know the internal components of said application, but you expect an output, and that output needs to be the same for each input. So if you have input A, then you know that if you input A, then you know that it always will output B, right? So black box testing, it's pretty much that. The user, you or me or the developer, we cannot go into the code of the application to know what it will do. We just have to rely that it will do it, right? So that's black box testing. And there's an amazing tweet by Kenzie Dodds on black box testing, and I 100% agree with this. The fact that black box testing has a name is just fine to me. I feel like black box testing should just be called testing, and anything else could be referred to as a nightmare. And that's true. That's 100% true. If you instead of testing how an application, how a user might use your application, instead of doing that, you're actually testing the internal components of your application, you're basically shooting yourself in the foot, right? So you're setting an obstacle for yourself, because on the long run, you would have to maintain those tests along with your code, and every time that you want to refactor something or deliver a new value, a new feature, or add more value into your application, it will feel like more work, and overall you would not trust your tests. That's what will end up happening, right? So what we have here is, for this example, this is a pretty simple counter. It's the standard React Redux counter. I have taken some of the functionality out of the application, so you know, some of the async functionality, so you can just add and decrement from the counter. But for the example that we're going to be exploring, I think it will be okay, right? So let's first jump into the code and let's take a look at what we have sort of laid out into the code. Right, so what we have here, it's a pretty standard how you would imagine a testing a scenario, and we have our reducer, and we have the counter component which will display the counter, right? So right now what we have are two tests that will break whenever we sort of change something on the internal components of the application. So if we were to tamper with the application in any sort of way, right? If we were to mess with a tiny component of our application, these two tests will break, because what they're doing is they're not testing functionality, they're testing the implementation. And by implementation, I mean that you are looking at specifics of that application. You're opening the black box and you're looking into the box and you're saying, all right, I know that this is used in this, so I will test that, instead of just testing how a user or end user will use the application. So we're gonna tamper a bit with the code and we're gonna see this test break. So the first thing I want to do for this test right here, which is just dispatching an action directly from the store, and then checking the text content of a dump node, which is the one that holds the counter value to be 1. And yeah, that's pretty much it. You just dispatch an action and then you look into a node, which is this one, right? And you're checking it to be 1. So let's mess around with our application and see how it all breaks. Lots of fun. So let's change the increment action to add, right? So because we're changing this, then of course we might want to also change this into our component. So instead of this being increment, we might want to name this add, right? Cool. Now, if we were to jump into our application, right, let me refresh. It works, all right? Because what you're doing is you're changing some of the internal components of the application. In this case, you're changing the name of an action creator in Redux, but the application behaves the same, right? It's the same counter that you will expect. But if we were to take a look at the tests, they will be failing. Why? Because if we look at this, we're expecting increment, and increment does no longer exist. We have renamed that to add. So, well, you might think, all right, since we have renamed that, then we might go into our tests and we might want to bring add into the equation, and all right, we're happy the tests are passing, our application behaves the same. But what you have to keep in mind is that even though our application behaves the same, what you're testing here is an internal component of the application, right? You're testing that this application needs Redux in order to work, and that should not be the case, because at any point or at any moment, you might want to switch to a new state management library instead of Redux. So what happens now? We will not do store.dispatch, or maybe we would do something else in order to increment the counter. So the fact that you're relying on the implementation of how your app is comprised will make this test, on the long run, it will not bring any value to you as a developer, and overall it will be, just horrible to maintain, right? So let's look at a second example. On this second example, I am clicking the value. I am clicking the button because I want to increase the counter. So I am clicking the increment value, right, which is laid onto the UI. But then instead of checking for the DOM node, which is rendered into the UI, what I'm doing is checking the internal state inside of the store. So I'm looking, what I'm doing is basically going into the store and I'm getting the state, counter, and then the value, and I'm expecting that to be 2. What happens is the following. If for whatever reason we decide to rename value to count, then all right, if we refresh the application, then cool, our application still works, but the tests are failing. Oh no, why? Because we are testing something that's part of the internals of the application, right? We're not testing at functional level, we are testing at an implementation level, because we know that we're using Redux. We want to sort of peek into the store and we want to see if the store has updated with the new value. This is not good, because you might want to change Redux at any point of time. So this test will break, right? So instead of this being counter the value, this will be counter.count, and everyone's happy. Cool. You might notice that when changing the other, bits and parts of the code that I have changed, that this test, it's still, passing. It's okay. Because what we're doing with this test is we're clicking a button and we're checking the screen, we're checking the UI to see if inside of this DOM node, this is being rendered, and that's it. I don't really care if you're using Redux or if you're dispatching an action. I don't really mind. My job is to go into here and click this button and then go into the UI and assert that we have a 3 into there. So what we're gonna do is we will get rid of this test, and because those are no longer there, this should be just 1, and we will see this pass. And to show you what I mean and to further illustrate this, what we can do is we can get rid of Redux into the component, and the test will still pass, because you really don't mind if we're using Redux or not. You really don't mind if we're using some other library. What you're doing is testing the way that a user will test, right? So your user, clicks on this button and it expects the counter to go to 1. You don't expect Redux or the store to be any value. So let's go into here and let's bring useState. Well, let's actually use, let's initialize a new state inside of the component, and let's do const count and set count, right? And let's initialize that to 0. What we want to do now is, all right, we don't want to use Redux anymore. We can, we can rely just alone on React to perform the same, right? To do the same sort of functionality that we want to do. So what we want to do here on the callback function for onClick is we want to set the count to whatever the current state is, right? This is decrement, so we will get the state and we will decrease 1 from the state. I think, yeah, that looks about fine. And we can do the same for increment, right? So we have the callback and we will increase or decrease depending on the scenario. And let's make sure to bring useState from React. And I don't know why I got rid of React, but it should be here. So if we go into your application, then we will see that, oh, I mean, we're not using Redux anymore, but the counter is still working. And if we look at the tests, I don't know why that's happening, but if we scroll down, we see that the tests are passing. And oh, I mean, all right, on the test, I remember that we rendered with the Redux provider and we set a store, but maybe this component doesn't need to be connected to the Redux store. And even though we have refactored the component and we got rid of Redux altogether and we're now using the React state for the component itself, then the test still passing. Amazing. So this gives me a lot of confidence to go into here and just mess around with the code, because I know that the test will still pass, because I know that I am testing the way that we intend to, the way that a user will interact with the application. And this is the black box approach that you might want to use when testing your UI, right? The one that we refer to as black box, but should just be referred to as testing. And this will make your life so much easier and give you a lot more confidence to just go around and mess with your code, tamper with it, because you know that the tests are there, they're strong, and they test the way that your user will interact with your application. And that's all I have for today. So if you like this video, make sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, leave a comment below, and yeah, keep on hacking.